We're going to be starting on the top of page 128. 128 in the true cause of global warmings. And so over the last couple of weeks, the great Kahans have been rehearsing this information concerning this defilement and these diseases. And I thought it was really interesting, that just yesterday, Pastor was reiterating these same things. And the defilement, this contamination, the condition of the world is so bad that we saw I guess it was a 4-year-old girl, a young girl, was trying on a shoe and got some deadly disease. This is how bad, the situation is. And what's really interesting is that only the house of Yahweh knows that this is part of why we have a problem with global warming. People want to still blame vehicles and, steam engines and wood-burning stoves and things like that. But, we know this isn't the case. So we're going to continue here on page 128 at the very top. It says, Yahweh's laws, keeping memorials to the dead, a tradition still practiced today known as Halloween. So what does Halloween have to do with global warming, right? Well, we're going to find out. It says, why did the popes make it a death penalty to own a Bible or to practice the laws written in the Holy Scriptures? Look at the definitions of the words defile and profane again. Notice what eating swine causes. Defile, to make filthy or dirty, pollute, to make ceremonially unclean, to corrupt, to profane or sully as a person's name, to violate the chastity of, or deflower. And profane, not connected with religion or religious matters. Secular, not initiated into the inner mysteries or esoteric knowledge of something, not hallowed or consecrated, showing disrespect or contempt for sacred things. Irreverent, to treat sacred things with irreverence or contempt. Desecrate, to put to a base or improper use, debase or defile. And so there's a couple of words in here. One, we're familiar with the word disrespect. It says number 4 under profane, it says disrespect or contempt for sacred things. So we know disrespect is not showing care and concern for things. Okay, disrespect is not showing care or concern or consideration. Okay, and it says for sacred things. And sacred, some synonyms for the word sacred is holy, blessed. Okay, so not being concerned or not showing care and concern for the holy things or the sacred things of Yahweh. Okay, so marriage is sacred to Yahweh, it's holy to Yahweh. Okay, the feast days, the Sabbath is holy, is sacred to Yahweh. Contracts, the gathering of ourselves together in honor of Yahweh, these are sacred or holy things. And we see the condition of the world, they're showing disrespect and contempt for just some of the things that I just named here that are holy to Yahweh. In another word there says irreverent, okay, or irreverence, not reverencing. And what does Solomon say what the conclusion of the matter was? To do what? To reverence Yahweh, right? To keep Yahweh's laws. That's the conclusion of the whole matter. That's the whole duty of man, is to reverence Yahweh by keeping his laws. But the world shows contempt for these laws, and now when you try on a shoe, you get a disease. When you walk on the beach, you get a disease. If you go barefoot out on your lawn to get the mail, you can get a disease. Okay, because of this contempt, of this disrespect towards the laws that govern life. So, matter of fact, life is holy to Yahweh. Right? The scriptures are holy to Yahweh. So our lives themselves, our very lives is holy to Yahweh. Yahweh says, live a holy and a righteous and a joyful life. Okay, so when we disrespect life, what do? We die. Right? We disrespect Yahweh. We disrespect the laws that govern, the rules that govern life, and we end up dying. We defile ourselves, like it says here, to defile, profane. So the next paragraph here on page 128, it says, could that be why the Savior Yeshua Messiah said, all are fools who do not believe the prophets? Luke 24, verse 25. Then he said to them, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Okay, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. So why did the great prophet of Yahweh say that people who eat pork would be destroyed in the end or last generation? Isaiah 66 verse 17. They who sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens, following after the priest in the midst of those who eat swine's flesh, that which is offered to gods, and the rodent will be consumed together, says Yahweh. Okay, so they eat swine's flesh that is offered to the gods, and the rodent, and they will be consumed together, says Yahweh. So when I was reading this, I was just remembering the capybara, okay, and the different things that these priests say is okay to do. And so I kind of just did a quick Google search, and I just want to read a little bit to you about this capybara. So first of all, the capybara, it says it's the largest living rodent in the world. That doesn't sound like a fish. Okay, because you know the Catholic Church said the rodent, though this capybara was okay to eat on Fridays during Lent, right? Because it lives by water, it's kind of like aquatic. But it's the world's largest living rodent. Okay, and it goes on and it says here that its close relatives include guinea pigs, rock cavies, I don't know how to say that, the agouti, the chinchilla, and the coypu, which is the nutria. Okay, and all of these are rodents. It says here, the capybara is not a threatened species, but is hunted for its meat and hide, and also for grease from its thick, fatty skin, which is used in the pharmaceutical trade. Okay? It's also used in the pharmaceutical trade. So even if you didn't go out and barbecue your personal capybara, you can be getting it in your medicine. Okay? So as we were reading this, the guinea pigs, the agouti, the chinchilla, the copu, or the coypu, this isn't red snapper, perch. These are not fish. Now, one fish was named as a relative to the capybara, all like rodents. Then I want to read this to you here. It says, there were once between 60 and 40 million beavers occupying the rivers and streams of North America, from the Great White North to the deserts of northern Mexico. Then the Europeans came. With them came disease. This is all, where did I get this from? I got on the internet, Wikipedia, I think. It says, with them came disease along with an insatiable desire for beaver pelts and for beaver castoreum, a urine-like secretion often used in perfume and cologne. Combined with the once sustainable hunting of beaver by indigenous North Americans for their meat, the beaver population rapidly declined. The species is now rebounding thanks to trapping regulations and now includes some 6 to 12 million individuals. In addition to disease, the European settlers also brought Catholicism with them and successfully converted a large population of the indigenous population. And the Native Americans and Canadians loved their beaver meat. So in the 17th century, the Bishop of Quebec approached his superiors in the church and asked whether his flock would be permitted to eat beaver meat on Fridays during Lent, despite the fact that meat eating was forbidden. Since the semi-aquatic rodent was a skilled swimmer, the church declared that the beaver was a fish. Being a fish, beaver barbecues were permitted throughout Lent. Problem solved. Okay, so before I read this last paragraph, it says here that this guy, the Bishop of Quebec, asked his superiors at the church. But where does the scriptures tell us we're supposed to ask? Abel. Ask at Abel, right? So if you would have called at Abel and said, can we eat this capybara because it lives by the water? What do you think the answer would be? No, right? No. Because if it's in the waters, they have to have what? Fins and scales, okay? Not fur. Not fur. And webbed feet. That's not a fish. Not a fish. But see, the problem, as we read in Zechariah, the mouths, let's read that. Because remember, the mouths of those who were to preach salvation, they were silenced. They were murdered. And so there weren't teachers, of righteousness during this time period, all according to prophecy. I want to just find that real quick. It's Zechariah chapter 8. Zechariah 8 verse 10. It says, For before those days there was no reward or salvation from Yahweh for man, because the mouths of, I can't even read this. For before those days there was no reward or salvation from Yahweh for man, because the mouths of the ones to preach the reward or the salvation from Yahweh were silent. Neither was there any peace because of the enemy, who turned every man each against his brother. Okay, so every man was turned against his brother, and the mouths of the teachers of righteousness, their mouths were silent. Okay, so they couldn't ask at Abel. So they went to the church and said, hey, is this rat, since it can swim, can we eat this? And the answer was yes. But the answer should have been no. Okay, the answer should have been no. So here it says that the church, by the way, also classified another semi-aquatic rodent, and that was the beaver that they said was okay. And now they're talking about the capybara as a fish for dietary purposes. The critter, the largest rodent in the world, is commonly eaten during Lent in Venezuela. It's delicious, one restaurant owner told the New York Sun in 2005. I know it's a rat, but it tastes really good. That's the deception. All right? If it tastes like chicken, just go ahead and eat chicken, because Yahweh says that chicken is okay, not rats. All right? But the problem is, without a teacher of righteousness, people, they establish their own righteousness and they do whatever they want to do. Okay? If you don't have a teacher that's authorized by Yahweh, leading and guiding you in Yahweh's way, it's just going to be a cesspool of sickness and disease, which is what we see today. Okay? So there's no denying that. Okay, but we're bearing witness to it. We're bearing complete witness. We're bearing witness to this complete plan of Yahweh. So continuing on here, it says, notice how they are destroyed. In Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15. And I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the powers of the earth and the powers of the heavens, the gods were driven away. For the verdict was reached that there is no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before Yahweh. And the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. So you see what the scripture says? They're going to be judged according to their faith and how much they believe in Jesus Christ. That's not what the writing says. It says they're going to be judged according to their works, based on the things that are written in the book. Verse 13, and the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Sheol the grave delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every man according to his works. And death and Sheol were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the fire, cast into the lake of fire. And so this book of life, one of the last things that's written in Revelations, Yeshua said in Revelations 20:22, and let's look at verse 19. Revelations 22:19. Well, let's look at 18. For I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If any man will add to these things, Yahweh will add to him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man will take away from the words of this book of this prophecy, Yahweh will take away his part out of the book of life and out of the holy city and from the things which are written in this book. He who testifies these things says, surely I come quickly. Hallelujah, Yahweh, may this be so. Come, Yeshua Messiah. So if you add anything to what's written in this book, then the plagues are going to be added to you. So what was added? Oh, well, you can eat the rat. It's a fish. No, it's not a fish. Well, now you're sick. Okay? If you take things out of it, then you're going to receive curses because you're doing away with the very thing that's protecting us from the sickness and diseases. So it's not a mystery as these false religious imposters want us to believe. It's not a mystery. If we break Yahweh's laws, we invite sickness and disease. A curse causeless will not come. Why were the apostles so adamant in showing that the kingdom of heaven would not receive those who eat pork? In 2 Corinthians 6:17, therefore, come out from among them and be separate, says Yahweh. Do not touch the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Does eating swine's flesh cause in the mind of man a lack of caring for or loving his brother or neighbor? Notice the apostles' writings in 1 Yochanan 3, verse 10. In this, the children of Yahweh and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of Yahweh, and he does not love his neighbor. The Savior said that in the last days, iniquity would abound and the love of the many would grow cold. In Matthew 24, verses 11 through 12. And many false prophets will arise and will deceive the many, and because iniquity will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. When people practice breaking Yahweh's laws, they do not love, as the apostle says. Notice further in 1 Yochanan 3, verses 11 through 13. For this is the message that you heard from the beginning. Okay, now think about this. This is in 1 Yochanan. This is towards the end of volume 2 in the Holy Scriptures. And he's saying, this is the message which you've heard from the beginning. When is the beginning? What's the beginning? What book means the beginning? Genesis, right? Genesis means the beginning. Okay, and so what was Abel teaching in the beginning? The laws of Yahweh, showing true care and concern. Okay, all of these are in the scriptures. It says, and this is the message which you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. This has always been the teachings from Yahweh's righteous priests. Verse 12, not as Cain. So obviously right here, here's a clue showing you that, look, I'm going all the way back to Genesis, right? He just brought up Cain right here, showing you that, look, I'm teaching you the same thing that Abel taught from the beginning. Okay, so these laws are not done away with. Never were. Never were done away with. But not as Cain, who was of that wicked one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder his brother? Because his works were evil and his brothers were righteous. So here's Yochanan in the New Testament saying that what Abel did was righteous by keeping the laws. But Cain, who didn't keep Yahweh's law, was evil. Okay? These are the things that we should be paying very close attention to. Okay, because like I said, these are the teachings which you've heard from the beginning. Then it says here, do not marvel, my brothers, if the world hates you. Why? Because just like it says here, because your works are righteous. If you're practicing righteousness, then you're righteous. And the world hates you because their works are evil. And this is what Yahweh says. But remember what Yeshua said. He says we're supposed to love our enemies too, right? Love our enemies. Because a lot of them just don't, well, they don't know. They don't know Yahweh. So that's not being held against them. So we're supposed to be showing them the true care and concern, the true love of Yahweh, right? So remember, again, we're still talking about this defilement, this profaneness, all of these different things. And here we get into this hatred, this murder. And remember in Yochanan chapter 8, Yeshua was talking to the Pharisees and to the other men of Israel. And they were upset with them. And he said, I tell you the truth, but yet you don't believe me. And, the conversation went on and they said, you have a demon. It's like, I'm telling you the truth when you're trying to say I have a demon. And the whole thing was they were upset. Now, maybe it's not that. I'm mixing a couple of scriptures up. At another point, they were upset with them because they didn't wash their hands before they ate. And they were talking about, well, this is how you defile yourself because you're not washing your hands. And Yeshua was explaining to them, it's not because we're not washing our hands that will defile a man, but it's the things that are in your character, the evil passions that's lurking in your hearts, the corruption, the blackmail, the gossiping, the backbiting, all of these things. Those are the things that defile a man. Okay, these are things that cause not just problems for an individual, but when these things spread, like we're seeing according to what's written in the scriptures, it causes global problems to the point where you can put on a shoe and get sick. Yeah, I'm still hitting on that because that's how bad it gets, to where you put on a shoe and get sick. You know, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem connected, does it? But that's how big the problem is. Putting on shoes and getting sick. Absolutely insane. But it's because of this defilement, these things that are in our untrained hearts, the breaking of Yahweh's law that causes us to go out and do things and create these diseases that lead to death because we're not reverencing Yahweh. Continuing on here, bottom of page 128, it says, now notice the next one carefully, because the apostle is showing that those who practice breaking Yahweh's laws do not have love. In 1 Yochanan 3:10, in this the children of Yahweh and the children of the devil are manifest, which means made openly known. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of Yahweh. Okay, so what is he saying? Whoever doesn't practice the keeping of Yahweh's law, you have no part with Yahweh. Okay, you're not of Yahweh. And he does not love his neighbor. So if you're not keeping Yahweh's laws, then you don't love Yahweh and you don't love your neighbor, right? So aren't those the two greatest commandments that Yeshua said? He said, these are the two greatest commandments. Love Yahweh with all your heart, soul, might, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if you're breaking Yahweh's laws, there's no way that you're fulfilling the two greatest of all commandments. There's no way. Now compare this with the Savior's words in Matthew 24, verses 11 and 12. And many false prophets will rise and will deceive the many. And because iniquity will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. And remember, these false prophets, you know, these are teachers, these are preachers. Okay, these are basically the trees that Yahweh said, don't partake in these trees in this garden. Okay, don't partake in the fruit of these trees. Yeshua said you will know them by the fruit that they bear. Okay, don't partake in these teachings. Okay, but they deceive many, and this iniquity that's abounding, that word abound, it means to thrive, to flourish. Let's see. I wrote a couple words up here because it means, let's see. It also means infest. A synonym for abound means to infest. So it flourishes, it thrives. A synonym means to infest. And then other synonyms of the word abound and infest are to overwhelm, to plague, to pollute, to defile. Okay, and I thought that was interesting that the word defile was a synonym that goes back to the word abound. And he says, because iniquity will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. So this iniquity, this corruption, this immorality, you know, that's thriving, it's infesting and plaguing the people. Okay, to the point where, like we see here, it's defilement. It's defilement. And it's all in these words here. And the love of the many will grow cold. And remember what it says in 1 Yochanan, what love is? It says we love Yahweh by keeping his laws, and that his laws are not grievous. Right? And then it also says, let me see. That was verse 3, Yochanan 5, verse 3. Verse 2 says, by this we know that we love the children of Yahweh, when we love Yahweh by keeping his laws. For this is the love of Yahweh, that we keep his laws, and his law is not grievous. Okay, so that's the love. That's the true love of Yahweh, the loving of to keep his laws. But again, because of this iniquity abounding, thriving, flourishing, this love of the keeping of Yahweh's laws, it grows cold. It diminishes. Okay, and this is what Yeshua is saying, and this is this confusion in the mind. You know, from eating pork, from doing the things that Yahweh tells us not to do. And other things were covered on previous pages. You know, the unlawful relationships, which was covered in detail, you know, in this book, and also yesterday. Continuing on here, it says that the Savior is saying the same thing the apostle said. You see now why the violence is getting worse, and why no person who eats swine's flesh, pig, pork, will enter Yahweh's kingdom. The answer is simple. They cannot love. Love is the greatest of the laws of Yahweh. Notice in Matthew 22, verses 36 through 39. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the laws? Yeshua said to him, you must love Yahweh your Father with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your might. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Deuteronomy 6:5. And you must love Yahweh your Father with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Leviticus 19, verse 18. Do not seek revenge, nor bear a grudge against one of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor, whether a brother or an enemy, as yourself. I am Yahweh. You see that? It says, I am Yahweh. It says, love your neighbor, whether a brother or an enemy, as yourself. And this is what Yahweh's what he's teaching us. Okay, so it doesn't leave any room for any misunderstanding, as far as what we're obligated to do. Okay, we're obligated to show care and concern, to show love for what Yahweh has created. Please read again and believe the prophets and apostles. Luke 24, verse 25. Then he said to them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. In 1 John 3:10, and this, the children of Yahweh and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of Yahweh, and he does not love his neighbor. Now, really focus on what Pastor's trying to get us to focus on. Okay, he's trying to get us to focus on not just ourselves, but the true way to peace. Okay, and remember, one of the ways to peace is by the things that you eat. Remember, Yahweh says, do not, in Leviticus it says, don't eat these things because I am holy, therefore you must become holy. You need to learn the difference between the clean and the unclean. You have to know the difference, because these things cause confusion in the mind. And this stuff over here doesn't. This is okay to eat. If it has fins and scales and is in the water, you can eat it. If it has fur and webbed feet and in the water, don't eat it. Simple as that. Yahweh tells us what we can and cannot do, what brings health, what brings a clear and a focused mind. Butter and honey shall he eat, so what? It can help him to choose righteousness because it helps the mind. There's something in it that is beneficial for the way that we think. If it wasn't, Yahweh wouldn't have said to do it. He would have said, stay away from butter and honey because it's fattening. He didn't say that. He said it helps you to choose righteousness. So eat your butter and honey. This is advice. This is wisdom. This is the law of Yahweh. Okay. This is the law of Yahweh. He says to do it. Live by every word that proceeds from his mouth. Don't be a fool. Okay. Don't be slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Isaiah 66:17. They who sanctify themselves. You see that? They who sanctify themselves. Yahweh is the one that does the sanctifying. He's the one that sets things apart and set people apart as holy. Okay, but these people are sanctifying themselves and purify themselves in the gardens, following after the priest in the midst of those who eat swine's flesh, that which is offered to gods, and the rodent which will be consumed together, says Yahweh. In 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 3. And so look at some of these things and remember what, I'm going to go back and read this in a second. It says, know this also, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, unforgiving, false accusers, without self-control, brutal, and despisers of those who are righteous. And remember, we just read where it says that don't marvel at the fact that the world's going to hate you. Cain hated Abel. The world hated Yeshua. He was telling them the truth, and yet they sought to kill him after falsely accusing him of things like having demons and things like that. Let's look at, it's in Matthew, what I'm looking for, Matthew 15. Just want to read a couple things here. Maybe it's not a Matthew 15. Give me 1 second. Okay, Matthew 23. So the reason I want to read this is because here in 2 Timothy, it talks about how mankind will be in these last days. Men will be lovers of themselves, covetous, boasters, and so on. And listen to what Yeshua said. And we kind of just hit on this a second ago, but this is what Yeshua said to the scribes and Pharisees. So chapter 23, verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of Yahweh in men's faces, for you yourselves will not go in, nor will you allow those who do come to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses and then make a show with long prayers. For this you receive the greater damnation. Down to verse 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithes on mint, anise, and cumin, but have neglected the more important matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. Tithing you ought to have done without leaving the other undone. You blind guides who strain at a gnat and then swallow a camel. And so in the footnote right here where it says strain at a gnat and swallow a camel, it says you seek to stop that which is against, let's see here, you seek to stop that which is not against Yahweh's laws and let pass that which is. So you strain at a gnat. So it's like, you know, that's not against Yahweh's law, but you're making this big deal, you know, like the law's being broken and it's not. But yet, this which is against Yahweh's law, you know, you're saying that it's okay, like the eating of a rat. Okay? So you strain at a gnat, but you swallow a camel. So you're actually, you know, basically like the scripture says, you're calling righteousness evil and evil righteousness. So if you could keep those two scriptures like kind of connected, it'll give you an understanding of what Yeshua is saying to them here. Verse 25, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and plate, but inside they are full of extortions, unlawful compulsions, blackmail, greed, unrestrained lack of contentment. You blind Pharisee, first cleanse the inside of the cup and plate, so that the outside of them may be clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Okay, so again, this is where Yeshua says, that which proceeds out of the mouth, that comes from the heart, these are the things that defile a man. Okay, this is that defilement that now is an abomination, is spreading from person to person. Okay, because of what's in the heart, this deceitfully and wicked above all things, this heart of ours. Okay, the intents and the thoughts are always on evil. It's on evil continually. Okay, these are the things that defile. It brings this profaneness, this iniquity, or this plague, this infestation of death. Okay, without a teacher of righteousness. And we were all in it until Yahweh called us to his house to hear the great witness in these last days. Not one of us were exempt from it. And we're still not exempt. The only way that we're made manifest, like the scripture shows, is if we practice righteousness. Okay, if we practice what we're being taught here. This is the only way that we belong to Yahweh. Okay, so continuing on here, page 129. At the top, it says, could this be why there is so much confusion and hatred in the world today? The Savior spoke of the last days, the last generation of man's governments of and by the people as being a time period when mankind would reject Yahweh's laws. Reject Yahweh's laws the most and have the greatest hatred ever. Notice his words carefully in Matthew chapter 24, verses 3, 7, and 11 through 12. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the ages? For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilences, disease epidemics, and earthquakes, natural disasters in place after place. And many false prophets will arise. What's that number? 4,199? 4,199 false prophets will arise and will deceive many. And because iniquity will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. Okay, the love of the many will grow cold. And so remember in Jeremiah chapter 23, I want to read it. In Jeremiah chapter 23, I was going to say I'm sorry for taking this much time, but I'm really not. I'm really not. Because these are valuable lessons that we really have to understand, because we're going to have to teach these things. So Jeremiah 23 verse 1, it says, now remember what it says here. Many false prophets will arise and will deceive the many. And because iniquity will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. And remember, this iniquity, you know, it's a teaching. You know, they're being taught to do away with Yahweh's laws. So Yahweh inspired Jeremiah to write, "Woe to the pastors, the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says Yahweh. Therefore, this is what Yahweh, the Father of Israel, says against the pastors who feed my people. You have scattered my flock and driven them away, and have not visited, or you have not attended to them. Behold, I am going to visit or attend to you for the evil of your doings, says Yahweh." Okay, so Yahweh says that I'm going to deal with the teachers, with these religious, these false prophets who are saying, hey, no, it's okay to eat this. It's okay to do that. It's okay to worship the dead and go trick-or-treating and all of these different things, right? Yahweh also continued in Jeremiah, verse 22. Is it 22? Yes, it says, but if they had stood it, no, look at 21. I have not sent those prophets, yet they ran. I have not spoken of them, yet they prophesied. But if they had stood in my counsel and had caused my people to hear my words, the law and the prophets, then they would have turned them from their evil way and from the evil of their doings. But they didn't stand in the counsel of Yahweh. Okay? They didn't turn the people from the evil of their doings. They taught them against the laws of Yahweh. And Yahweh said in Yeketskia what? Let me see. I'm thinking of scriptures and I'm trying to remember where they're at. Yeketskia 22. Verse 25, again, it says here that there's a conspiracy of her prophets in her midst, like a roaring lion ravening the prey. They have devoured souls. They have taken the treasure and precious things. They have made many widows in the midst of her. Didn't Yeshua say that to the scribes and Pharisees, that you have taken the homes of widows? He just said that to the Pharisees. We just talked about that. But this is all been going on, you know, from the beginning with that teaching, okay, which is completely opposite to Yahweh's way. Now, verse 26, her priests have violated my law and have profaned my holy things. So there's that word profane again, okay? That profane, to treat with disrespect or contempt for the holy things, irreverent, and to defile. So her priests have violated my law and have profaned my holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and profane. They have not taught the difference between the unclean and the clean. They have shut their eyes to the keeping of my Sabbaths, and I am profane among them. Okay, so, you know, do they keep the seventh day holy? No. No. You know, it's all about the Lord's day, the Sunday, the Son's day, right? Her princes in her midst are like wolves ravening the prey. Shedding blood, y'all should be thinking about Genesis 49 right there, like wolves ravening the prey, that prophecy. Shedding blood and destroying souls to acquire dishonest gain. So that's what it is, right? This money, these riches, is a root of all evil. Her prophets covered their deeds with whitewash, seeing false visions and divining lies to them, saying, this is what Father Yahweh says, but Yahweh has not spoken. The people of the land has used oppression, have exercised robbery, and have mistreated the poor and needy. Yes, they have wrongfully oppressed the stranger. And we just read where Yahweh says, look, love your neighbor. Love your brother and even the enemy. Love him as yourself, because I'm Yahweh. Remember what Yahweh says? He says, look, who can stand against me in battle? I will walk right through him. Or take hold of my strength and make peace with me. Okay, Yahweh's making us in his likeness according to his image. And he's going to give us the strength that he has, which is what? The laws, right? The strength of character. The strength to make right choices. Right? And so why do we need to physically retaliate or verbally retaliate when we have the strength of Yahweh to be able to withstand these fiery darts of the adversary and still make right choices, having self-control? We just read that in these last days, you know, men will be lovers of themselves, not having self-control, but not in Yahweh's house, not according to the teachings of Yahweh, which we heard from the beginning, to love Yahweh and to love your neighbor, to love yourself as you love yourself, right? Everybody here loves themselves, right? Remember, Pastor said, this was years ago. He said, yeah, well, I got in this argument with this lady, the receptionist, and then I realized, like, man, I was a fool. And I went to apologize, and she came and apologized first. And I'm like, man, I hate it when people are more righteous than me. Right? And then he also said, I can't remember how he said it. He had corrected somebody about doing something, but as soon as he did it, I was quick to forgive myself, though. But, he's joking to show us how sometimes selfish we can be if we're not paying attention to ourselves. Right? He used these jokes to help us to pay attention to ourselves, to get the point across. Okay, you will correct someone, and then next thing you know, you did it. And then in your confession, you tell the priest that your brother did it instead of telling that you did it. Self-examination, Yahweh gives us this as a tool to get rid of this defilement that's in us. All right, this is how we cleanse our ways. How can a man cleanse his ways? By taking hold of Yahweh's laws. This is how we do these things. So continuing on here, it says, verse 7 shows extreme hatred, and this is talking about Matthew 24, nation against nation, and the kingdoms against kingdom. Verse 11 shows religions against the Creator Yahweh. Verse 12 shows the extreme rejection against Yahweh's laws that, if broken, would cause sickness, disease, and now extreme confusion with deep hatred. This generation not only eats pork by itself, but they also mix it and blood into just about every product on the market. Even the herbs and drugs they give you for the sickness and diseases you get from eating pork contains pork. So you're sick from eating pork, and it's like, here, take 2 more of these and call me in the morning. Take 2 more and call me in the morning. It's like, can I just get the apple instead? Oh, here, take the one out of the pig's mouth. This stuff is defiled too. All of these things are defiled because of these practices, because of the iniquity will abound. Okay, this way of life, these teachings against Yahweh's law, they're thriving. They're everywhere except one place where Yahweh chose to place his name. Okay, praise Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. And he said, I will only have that one place. Okay, that one place, what's that? That's Moshe 3:7, right? I will only have one work, which is the work that I prophesied of in advance by my servants, the one whom I sent. Not these ones that we just read in Jeremiah, whom he didn't send, but yet they're running. What are they doing? Oh, man, I'm going to hate to do this to y'all, but I'm going to do it anyway. They're running and they're telling it on the mountain, right? Oh, y'all don't know that one? Well, praise Yahweh. It's a lot of people that do know what I'm talking about out in the world. Like, I can't believe he just said that. That's my most preferred song. All right, continuing on here. To the scientific world, before the telescope and the microscope, Yahweh showed limited knowledge to his prophets. Okay? Limited knowledge. So think about what that's saying here. You must believe without what? You have to believe without seeing. Okay? Believe without seeing. Okay? Believe the inspired teachings of Yahweh. Okay? So they didn't have microscopes and telescopes. That was much greater knowledge than we see today. And it all came straight from the Creator Yahweh. The great prophet Isaiah knew the world was round. I'm sorry, this stuff is just funny. So Isaiah knew that the world was round for centuries. Let me go back. Okay, so the great prophet Isaiah knew that the world was round, yet centuries after the prophet Isaiah, the unbelieving popes of the Catholic Church murdered those who believed the world was round because the Catholic Church, with all of its schools of higher learning, thought that the world was flat. Okay, so strangely enough, there's still some people that think that the earth is flat. Okay. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 20. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens, the firmament, like a curtain, and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. Okay, you see that underlined part? The circle of the earth. Okay, now if the earth was flat, he would have said, he stretches it out above the flat earth. That's flat as a board, stiff as a 2x4, or a 4x8 sheet of MDF, whatever. But he didn't say that. It was also known that the earth is suspended in space. This was another controversy. Yet only now can it be scientifically proven that this information in the inspired scriptures is true. Notice Yeshub, or Job 26 verse 7. He stretches out the north sky over an empty space, and he hangs the earth upon nothing. Okay? So these are the things that are in the inspired scriptures. You know, did Yeshub have like that, telescope that they have at the Vatican? You know, that the dome opens up, takes about a half hour. No, I don't really know how long it takes. But then they just look out into the heavens like, well, I guess Pluto's not a planet anymore. Let's just change the status of that deal there. Oh, what's that going on Jupiter right there? These guys, the prophets didn't have these things. They had a connection with Yahweh, which we are sorely lacking in these last days. These men had a connection with Yahweh to the point that they can write these things down. And now, about 6,000 of years later, now they're saying, oh, I guess they were right. Man, well, let's go ahead and make the prophets saints now. Since we murdered them and killed them. Well, they're saints now. They knew what they were talking about. We're sorry for murdering them. We don't need you to tell us that they were saints. Yahweh called them saints. We agree with Yahweh. Continuing on here, it says, how is it possible, or how was it possible, that the great prophet of Yahweh, Yeshub, knew that there is nothing but blackness to the north and that the earth is suspended in space? Without the microscope, it was impossible to see that many forms of life is in the blood. Yet Yahweh's priests knew this and warned the people not to consume it. If this had not been true, scientists could prove it today. Yet they prove the inspired scriptures true. Yet the churches and schools still act as though the scriptures cannot be trusted. Okay, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Okay, if the things in the scriptures weren't true, if it's not true, then they can easily say, well, we're looking in a microscope and there's no life in this. There's no sickness. There's no diseases in the blood. But there is. There is. It's in the blood. And the priest of Yahweh knew it. And this was the teaching from the beginning. From the very beginning, do not eat the blood. Leviticus chapter 17, verses 10 through 16. Whatever man of the house of Israel or the stranger who sojourns among you, who eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and I will cut him off from among his people. Now, here's the Christian mind. I will set my face against that person who eats blood. We don't even know what in the priestly blessing it says, Yahweh make his face to shine upon you, right? Okay, we already know that these things, Yahweh's talking about making man in his likeness and in his image. Making man like him, thinking like him, behaving, conducting themselves just like him. If we do these things, we're not like Yahweh. So Yahweh saying, I will turn my face. He's saying, look, you're cutting yourself off from me. I'm not able to hear your prayers because you're separating yourself from my teachings. You're defiling, you're killing yourself. How can I make you like me when you won't even listen to me? I'm profane among you. But turn and listen. Nope, well, you murdered him. Okay, I'm going to send someone else. Oh, you did it again. I'm going to send someone else. You did it again. But not in these last days, right? Not in these last days. This is a promise from Yahweh. Okay, so Yahweh says, I will set my face against that person who eats blood and will cut him off from among his people. He's being cut off from Yahweh because of the choices that he's making. Verse 11, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life. Therefore, I say to the children of Israel, no one among you shall eat blood, nor shall any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood. Whatever man of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn among you, who hunts and catches any animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. And you see, he didn't leave it up to interpretation. Again, he said, whichever animal or bird that may be eaten. Because he's talking to people that he's already taught. Look, you can't eat this and you can't eat that. So The priests are teaching the difference between the clean and the unclean, right? And we just read where the other priests violated Yahweh's law and they're not distinguishing between the two. Okay, but Yahweh says here, this is his priest teaching, whatever bird or animal that you catch or hunt, okay, that you may eat, pour out the blood and cover it. Verse 14, for it is the life of all flesh. Its blood sustains its life. Therefore, I said to the children of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any flesh, for the life of all flesh is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off, because you're allowing these things, this life to enter into you that causes confusion in your mind. You're not eating butter and honey, you're eating blood, you're eating the life, the source that sustains the flesh in these last days, in this time period of man's history. So verse 15, anyone, whether he is a native of your own country or a stranger, whoever eats anything found dead or torn by wild animals, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until sunset. Then he shall be clean. But if he does not wash his clothes nor bathe his body in water, he shall bear his iniquity. Okay? And remember the things that we covered concerning this iniquity, because again, it starts somewhere and then it spreads. Okay, it spreads. How can these men who wrote verse 11, for the life of the flesh is in the blood, and warned us not to eat the blood, have known this? They didn't have microscopes yet. They knew this fact because Yahweh, the creator of flesh and blood, showed them this truth. Okay? Yahweh showed them this truth. And I like how Pastor wrote in his paragraph right above Leviticus 17:10. It says, yet they prove the inspired scriptures true, talking about science, but the churches and schools still act as though the scriptures cannot be trusted, right? They act like the scriptures can't be trusted, but then right here, when Pastor's proving to us, he's constantly proving to us who Yahweh is. It says they didn't have microscopes, yet they knew this fact because Yahweh, the creator of all flesh and blood, showed them this truth. So without the little schools of higher learning, without the little technology and iPhones and stuff, they knew not to eat the blood because Yahweh was with them. Man, this is an awesome understanding here, to know that Yahweh was guiding his people without this technology that we have today. Mankind trusting in his Father. Okay, and Yahweh's reestablishing that connection with us in these last days, trusting in him. Like it says in Malachi chapter 4, taking hold of the strength of Yahweh and turning the hearts of the fathers to the people, right? To the children, the hearts of the children to the fathers, This is a great thing that Yahweh is showing us, teaching us how to show love for Yahweh and love for one another. It says here, let's see, Leviticus chapters 11, 13, 14, and 18 show practices that should be called medical practices that actually prevent disease. How could the prophets have known this without modern technology? How did they know that pork contained things such as trichina that could make a person sick, and that sickness could be passed on to others? Swine and other animals are actually identified and set apart as being unclean. In Leviticus chapter 11, verse 7, and the pig, although it has a split hoof completely divided, yet it does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. Today, we know and have proved the inspired scriptures true. If a modern day scientist had discovered this phenomenon, he would be hailed the man of the year, yet the one who inspired this great wisdom isn't glorified. Okay, he isn't glorified. But remember though, let me see if he says this. Okay, so remember, Yahweh says, I will not give my glory to another, right? So it's not for the world right now with their practices to bring honor and glory to Yahweh. That's reserved for pastor, right? Pastor is bringing the glory of Yahweh to us. He's lifting Yahweh up before us and teaching us how to do the same thing. Okay, Yahweh's not going to let, the Pope bring honor to his name. There's no way he can. Remember the scripture says, how can a fountain of fresh water also bring forth? Is it bitter or is it salty? Either or, we get the point. There's not a mixture there. There's not a mixture. You have to be righteous. Continuing on here, it says, why? The schools of America and all over the world under the jurisdiction of the Catholic Church are forced to teach Darwin's theory of evolution, even though it has been proven completely wrong with the discovery of DNA that traces mankind back to one woman, just as all of Yahweh's inspired prophets wrote. The discovery of DNA, or of this DNA, should have brought praise to Yahweh and the inspired scriptures. But with the microscope, it has been proven that sodomy, fornication, adultery, homosexuality, and bestiality all cause or create different forms of viruses that mutate and pass from person to person, ruining their health. This discovery actually, again, proved the scriptures and validity of the inspired scriptures. Notice again in Leviticus 18, verse 22. You shall not have sexual relations with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination. The Hebrew word translated abomination means causes sickness and disease. Now compare this to Leviticus 18, verse 30. Therefore, you shall keep my ordinance and commit none of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourselves with them. I am Yahweh, your Father. Okay, so remember, Yahweh is teaching us to become just like him. Okay? Now consider this. Yahweh is teaching us to become like him. And remember, he says, I am Yahweh, I change not. I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever. But yet mankind is saying, now it's okay for same-sex marriages. Yahweh's like, nah, bro. I'm not doing that. I don't practice that. No, I'm not marrying a man. I never will marry a man. Not going to do it. Okay? Not going to do it. But yet, these are the laws that mankind is passing, saying that it's okay, even though science proves that, certain lifestyles bring sickness and disease. Okay? Certain lifestyle brings sickness and disease. I read an article years ago about a group of men, homosexuals, that are specifically called bug chasers. Okay? And they admit that they know that lifestyle, eventually leads or has it greatly increases the opportunity to receive HIV/AIDS. Okay? And so some of these men, these bug chasers, actually look for HIV positive men so that they can become infected with this disease, so that they can then have control of their life instead of, the risk or not knowing whether they're going to get it or not. So they feel that they have to get control of their lives by getting the disease, and then it's like, okay, now I got it. Now let me enjoy life. Because without having it, they're worried, like, I might get it. So they go and get it. They look for it. Okay? If that's not confusion, I don't know what is. Okay? This is confusion. But now we're passing laws saying, hey, confusion is okay. Okay, they're not saying it like that, but it's in the Hebrew words in the gematria. I'm sure it is. Actually, it is 733, right? All right, so continuing on here. Oh, man. Yeah, I'm going to read this real quick. It says here, the Hebrew word translated abomination, I read that. Let's see, compare. Okay, so the Hebrew word translated abominable means these diseases can be passed from person to person and even animals. Okay, remember, a lot of these diseases are zoonotical diseases, which means you get them from animals. Okay, so bestiality is not a benefit for mankind. The prophets show that these same viruses can defile the earth, air, and water, all of which refer to the environment. And now we can even add shoes to the list. We can add shoes to the list. Everything is defiled, man. Yahweh says, don't touch the unclean thing. Okay, and I will receive you. Everything is defiled because of these practices that defile a man. And we covered what defiles a man. Okay, the teachings against Yahweh's laws, which allow us to partake in all of these lewd acts, okay, which create life in the blood, and then we consume that blood. And then when we go and get medicine because we're sick, then they give us, again, more pork in the medicine, or the beaver, right? The beaver fat, in the medicine, in the pharmaceutical trade. And then if that doesn't work, hey, after we take a shower and we go see the doctor, then we spray on that cologne that also has that beaver urine in it, right? We read all of this tonight. Right? In this short hour, we read all of these things that bring sickness and disease and defilement because we reject Yahweh's laws. Men, the Great Kahana pick up on page 131 next week or in the next class, starting at the time of the end. May Yahweh bless your understanding. Don't reject Yahweh's laws, and Yahweh will receive you. Praise Yahweh. Let's